They say a mother's instinct is never wrong, but nothing, absolutely nothing, could have prepared me for what I witnessed through that hospital room door on that cold November morning. The image is seared into my mind. My daughter-in-law's trembling hands, a syringe glinting under fluorescent lights, and my son's unconscious body lying defenseless in that sterile bed. What should have been a routine visit to check on David's recovery from what we all believed was a simple gallbladder surgery turned into the most horrifying moment of my 60 years on this earth. My name is Evelyn Moore, and I'm 60 years old. I've lived in Columbus, Ohio, my entire life, raised 2 beautiful children in a modest home on Maple Street, and worked 35 years as a school librarian before retiring. I thought I'd seen everything life could throw at me: divorce, financial struggles, health scares, but I was wrong. So terribly, devastatingly wrong. It started 3 weeks before Thanksgiving. My son David, 37 years old, and the light of my life, had been admitted to Columbus General Hospital for emergency gallbladder removal. He'd been experiencing severe abdominal pain for weeks, but being the stubborn man he is, he'd refused to see a doctor until he collapsed at work. His wife Jessica, 35, a registered nurse at the same hospital, had insisted on taking charge of his care. At the time, I thought it was touching, a devoted wife caring for her suffering husband. That particular morning, I'd planned to arrive at the hospital around 10 o'clock, but I'd woken up early, plagued by an inexplicable anxiety that wouldn't let me rest. Something deep in my gut told me to go immediately. I arrived at 7:30 instead, carrying David's favorite magazines and the homemade chicken soup I'd stayed up late preparing. The hospital corridors were quiet, the morning shift just beginning their rounds. As I approached room 412, I noticed the door was slightly ajar. I was about to push it open and call out cheerfully when I froze. Through the narrow gap, I could see Jessica standing beside David's bed. Her back was to me, but her posture was rigid, unnatural. In her right hand, she held a syringe. My breath caught in my throat as I watched her carefully insert the needle into David's IV line and slowly depress the plunger, injecting a clear liquid into the tube that fed directly into my son's bloodstream. My heart hammered against my ribcage. Every instinct screamed that something was catastrophically wrong. This wasn't a scheduled medication. I'd memorized David's entire treatment plan. The way Jessica glanced nervously toward the door, the furtive speed of her movements, the fact that she was doing this alone without any other medical staff present, it all spelled danger. I must have made a sound, a gasp, a sharp intake of breath, because suddenly Jessica whirled around. Our eyes locked. The color drained from her face, leaving her skin a ghastly white. The empty syringe clattered to the floor. "Mom," she stammered, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's not what it looks like." But her eyes told a different story. They were wide with panic, darting between me and the IV bag, calculating, desperate. In that split second, I saw the truth written across her guilty face. This was exactly what it looked like. My hands were already reaching for my phone. My fingers, trembling but determined, dialed 911. "I need police at Columbus General Hospital, room 412, immediately," I said, my voice surprisingly steady despite the terror coursing through my veins. "I just witnessed someone tampering with a patient's IV." Jessica's face crumpled. "Please, Mom, you don't understand." "Don't you dare call me Mom," I hissed, positioning myself between her and David's vulnerable form. "Don't you dare. If you're following this story, please hit that like button and subscribe to this channel. I need your support now more than ever as I share what happened next. And please, leave a comment telling me where you're watching from and what time it is there. Knowing I'm not alone in this helps more than you could imagine. The next 7 minutes felt like 7 hours. Jessica stood frozen on one side of the hospital bed, while I remained planted firmly on the other, my body a physical barrier between her and David. My son lay unconscious, completely unaware that his life hung in the balance, unaware that the woman he'd pledged to love and cherish might have just poisoned him. "Evelyn, please, just listen to me," Jessica pleaded, her voice cracking. She took a step toward me, hands outstretched in supplication. "You've got this all wrong. I can explain everything if you'll just give me a chance." "Stay back," I commanded, surprising myself with the steel in my voice. "Don't come any closer to him. Don't you dare touch my son again. Tears were streaming down Jessica's face now, leaving dark mascara trails on her cheeks. "I love David. I would never hurt him. You have to believe me." "Then what did you just inject into his IV?" I demanded. "What was in that syringe? Why were you doing it secretly, without any other nurses or doctors present? Why did you look so terrified when you saw me?" She opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. No words came out. The silence was more damning than any confession. I could hear footsteps echoing down the hallway, growing louder. Hospital security arrived first, 2 burly men in dark uniforms who immediately assessed the situation. Behind them came 2 Columbus police officers, their presence making everything suddenly, horrifyingly real. "Ma'am, we received a call about a possible assault," one officer said, his sharp eyes taking in the scene. The dropped syringe on the floor, Jessica's tear-stained face, my defensive posture, David's unconscious form. "That's my daughter-in-law," I said, pointing at Jessica with a shaking finger. "I witnessed her injecting something into my son's IV bag. Whatever it wasn't prescribed. I know his entire medication schedule. This was something else, something secret." The officer's expression hardened. He turned to Jessica. "Ma'am, is this true? Did you administer medication to this patient?" Jessica's shoulders sagged. Yes, but are you authorized to administer medication to family members?" the officer continued. "No, but do you have authorization from the attending physician to administer any treatments at this time?" Jessica's silence was answer enough. "I'm going to need you to step away from the patient," the officer said firmly. "And we'll need to search your belongings. Do you consent to a search, or do I need to obtain a warrant?" Something shifted in Jessica's expression. Fear transformed into something harder, more desperate. "You can't search my things. You have no right. I'm a nurse at this hospital. I was just trying to help my husband. Help him by secretly injecting unapproved substances into his IV?" the second officer interjected. "Ma'am, that's not help. That's potentially attempted murder." The words hung in the air like toxic smoke. Attempted murder. My daughter-in-law was being accused of trying to murder my son. The room tilted, and I had to grasp the bed railing to steady myself. "Please empty your pockets and your bag," the first officer instructed Jessica. "Now." Jessica's eyes darted toward her large designer purse. A Coach bag I remembered David buying her for their 5th anniversary last year. Something they'd saved 3 months to afford. Her reaction was telling. Her whole body tensed, and she instinctively shifted to block the officer's path to it. "No," she whispered. "Please don't look in there. I'm begging you." But the officers weren't swayed by her pleas. One of them carefully retrieved the bag, while the other kept a watchful eye on Jessica. I watched, my heart in my throat, as they began removing items. Wallet, keys, makeup bag, tissues. Everything seemed normal until the officer's hand emerged, holding a small, clear Ziploc bag. Inside were 3 more syringes, their barrels still full of the same clear liquid I'd seen her inject into David's IV. "What is this?" the officer demanded. Jessica's lips trembled. "Insulin," she whispered. "It's insulin." The room erupted. Hospital security immediately called for the medical team. Within seconds, David's room was flooded with doctors and nurses, all working frantically to assess his condition, to determine how much damage had been done, whether my arrival had been early enough to save him. "Insulin," I gasped, my mind racing to understand. "David's not diabetic. Why would you give him insulin?" One of the doctors, a gray-haired man with kind eyes and a grim expression, turned to me. "Ma'am, if a non-diabetic patient receives insulin, especially in the doses that these syringes could deliver, it would cause severe hypoglycemia. Their blood sugar would drop dangerously low. In large enough quantities, it could cause seizures, brain damage, coma, or death." The doctor's words echoed in my mind as I watched them work frantically on David. Nurses rushed in with glucose solutions, monitoring equipment beeped urgently, and someone called for an emergency endocrinology consult. My son's life was being fought for right before my eyes, and the person responsible for putting him in danger stood handcuffed just feet away. "How long has this been going on?" I demanded, whirling on Jessica. The police had secured her wrists, but she remained in the room as the investigation proceeded. "How many times have you done this to him?" Jessica's face was a mask of misery, but she remained silent, her lips pressed into a thin line. "Answer me!" I screamed, my composure finally shattering. "How long have you been poisoning my son?" One of the doctors monitoring David's vitals spoke up, his voice grave. "Mrs. Moore, your son's medical records show he's been experiencing unexplained episodes of confusion, weakness, and loss of consciousness for approximately 6 weeks. He's been admitted to the hospital 3 times in the past month alone. Each time, his blood sugar was found to be critically low, but we couldn't determine why. He tested negative for diabetes, his pancreas showed no abnormalities, and there was no medical explanation for his symptoms. 6 weeks. The words hit me like a physical blow. Jessica had been doing this for 6 weeks. But he only came in for gallbladder surgery 3 weeks ago, I said, struggling to understand the timeline. The gallbladder surgery was real, the doctor confirmed, pulling up David's chart on a nearby computer. But looking at these records now, I'm wondering if his initial symptoms, the abdominal pain, the nausea, might have been caused by the repeated insulin injections causing his blood sugar to crash. Severe hypoglycemia can mimic gallbladder problems. My legs gave out. A nurse rushed forward with a chair, easing me into it before I collapsed completely. They'd removed his gallbladder, an irreversible surgery for a condition he never actually had. Jessica had caused so much damage that David had undergone unnecessary surgery. Surgery that cost $38,000, even with insurance, money we didn't have. Money David had been working overtime for months to save up. "Why?" I whispered, looking at Jessica through tears. "Why would you do this to him? He loves you. He's worked himself to exhaustion providing for you, giving you everything you wanted. Why?" For the first time since the police arrived, Jessica spoke. Her voice was hollow, devoid of the warmth I'd once associated with my daughter-in-law. "You want to know why? Fine, I'll tell you why." She laughed bitterly. "Because I'm tired, Evelyn. I'm tired of being married to a man who's more devoted to his mother than to his wife." The accusation stung, but I refused to be derailed. "So you tried to kill him? That's your solution? You're a nurse, Jessica. You took an oath to do no harm." "I wasn't trying to kill him," she snapped, her eyes flashing with something dark and frightening. "I was trying to keep him dependent on me, weak enough that he'd need me, grateful enough that he'd finally choose me over you." The confession hung in the air, more horrifying than I could have imagined. This wasn't a crime of passion or a moment of madness. This was calculated, sustained, deliberate torture. Every time he got better, every time he started regaining his strength, he'd talk about going back to work, about Sunday dinners at your house, about how much he missed helping you with yard work, Jessica continued, her voice rising hysterically. "It was always you. So I made sure he stayed weak. I made sure he needed me." One of the police officers stepped forward. "Ma'am, you're confessing to multiple counts of assault and attempted murder. I need to advise you of your rights." "I don't care about my rights," Jessica shouted. "I don't care about anything anymore. Do you know what it's like living in the shadow of a man's mother? Do you know what it's like coming second for 8 years of marriage?" "My son came second to your murderous jealousy," I said coldly, finding strength I didn't know I possessed. "He came second to your twisted need for control. Don't you dare try to make yourself the victim here." The doctor who'd been monitoring David's vitals suddenly spoke urgently. "We need to move him to ICU immediately. His blood sugar is still dropping despite the glucose we've administered." She must have given him a massive dose. As they prepared to wheel David's bed out of the room, I grabbed his hand, squeezing it tightly. His skin was cold and clammy, his breathing shallow. "Hold on, baby," I whispered. "Please hold on. I'm here now. You're safe now." They rushed him out, leaving me standing in the suddenly quiet room with Jessica, the police officers, and the remaining hospital security. The lead officer turned to Jessica with a grim expression. "Jessica Moore, you're under arrest for attempted murder, multiple counts of assault, and illegal administration of a controlled substance. You have the right to remain silent." As the Miranda rights were read, I sank back into the chair, my mind reeling. How had I missed this? How had I not seen the monster lurking beneath my daughter-in-law's pleasant smile? The police escorted Jessica out of the room in handcuffs, but not before the lead detective, a sharp-eyed woman named Detective Sarah Chen, asked me to remain for questioning. I sat in that sterile hospital room, still clutching David's magazines and the now cold container of soup I'd brought, and tried to make sense of the nightmare unfolding around me. "Mrs. Moore, I need to ask you some questions about your son's medical history and his relationship with his wife." Detective Chen said gently, settling into the chair across from me. She had a kind face, but her eyes were shrewd, missing nothing. Anything, I said hoarsely. Anything that will help put that woman away. Detective Chen pulled out a notebook. When did David first start experiencing health problems? I thought back, my mind shuffling through memories like cards in a deck. It was early September, just after Labor Day. He called me one evening complaining of severe nausea and dizziness. He said he felt like he might pass out. Jessica told him it was probably something he ate, but it kept happening. Once, sometimes twice a week, he'd have these episodes. Did you ever witness these episodes yourself? Yes, I said, my voice breaking. 3 times. Once at Sunday dinner at my house, he collapsed right at the table. We called an ambulance, and they said his blood sugar was dangerously low, but the tests at the hospital showed nothing wrong. No diabetes, no tumor, nothing. The doctors said it was a mystery. I pressed my trembling hands against my face. It wasn't a mystery. It was Jessica. Detective Chen nodded, making notes. What was Jessica's behavior like during these episodes? I paused, forcing myself to remember details I'd been too worried to analyze at the time. She was always very calm. Now that I think about it, almost too calm, like she knew exactly what was happening and what to do. She'd give him orange juice, get him to the hospital, stay by his side. Everyone praised her for being such a devoted wife. The irony was bitter on my tongue. Did David's episodes follow any pattern? Certain times of day? Certain activities? They seemed to happen more frequently after he'd been doing physical activity, I recalled slowly. After working out, after yard work, after sex? I stopped abruptly, embarrassed, but Detective Chen simply nodded encouragingly. Jessica would always bring him a special protein shake afterward. She said it was to help with his recovery, to keep his energy up. Detective Chen's pen stopped moving. A protein shake that she prepared? Yes, always. She was very particular about it. Said she'd researched the perfect blend of nutrients for him. David thought it was sweet. My stomach churned with nausea. The insulin was in the shakes, wasn't it? We'll need to test any remaining shakes in your son's home, Detective Chen confirmed. But yes, that would be an effective delivery method. Mixed into a thick shake, he wouldn't taste it, and the insulin would cause his blood sugar to crash shortly after consumption, especially if he'd just exercised and his body had already depleted its glucose stores. A nurse knocked and entered, carrying a thick file. Detective, you asked for David Moore's complete medical records. This is everything from the past year. Detective Chen thanked her and began flipping through the pages. Her expression grew darker with each page. Mrs. Moore, your son has been to the emergency room 12 times in the past 6 weeks. 12 times. Each visit noted severe hypoglycemia, and each time, Jessica was the one who brought him in. 12 times, I repeated numbly. How did I not know about all of these visits? According to these notes, most of them occurred during the week, during work hours. It appears Jessica would text you updates saying David was resting comfortably, or that the doctors said it was just stress from work. She controlled the flow of information to you. Of course she did. Jessica had systematically isolated David, ensuring I wouldn't see the full extent of what was happening. Every time I'd offered to come to the hospital, she'd insisted I shouldn't trouble myself, that David needed rest, that too many visitors would overwhelm him. A hospital administrator entered the room, his expression troubled. Detective Chen, we've reviewed the security footage from the past month. We have multiple instances of Jessica Moore entering her husband's room during overnight shifts when she wasn't assigned to this floor. Each time, she carried her personal bag. We also found discrepancies in the medication logs. Insulin is missing from our pharmacy storage. How much insulin? Detective Chen asked sharply. Approximately 40 vials over the past 6 weeks. The number was staggering. 40 vials. That represented thousands of dollars worth of medication, stolen from a hospital pharmacy by a trusted nurse, used to systematically poison her own husband. She had access to everything, I whispered. She worked here. She knew how to steal the insulin without being caught. She knew exactly how much to give him to make him sick without killing him outright. She knew how to manipulate his medical records. Actually, we don't believe she manipulated his medical records, the administrator interjected. The records are accurate, but she may have caused symptoms that led to misdiagnosis. The abdominal pain, the nausea, these are symptoms of severe hypoglycemia. The imaging that showed gallbladder inflammation could have been legitimate inflammation caused by the stress on his body from repeated insulin poisoning. So the surgery was real, but the underlying cause was Jessica's poisoning, Detective Chen summarized. How much did that surgery cost? With insurance, the patient's out-of-pocket expense was $38,000, the administrator replied. Without insurance, it would have been over $90,000. $38,000. Money that David had scraped and saved, working double shifts, skipping meals, driving a car that barely ran because he couldn't afford repairs. All for a surgery he never needed, caused by a wife who was systematically destroying him. There's more, Detective Chen said, looking up from the medical records. Mrs. Moore, did you know that Jessica is the primary beneficiary on a life insurance policy for your son worth $500,000? $500,000. The number echoed in my mind like a death sentence. My son's life reduced to a dollar amount, a payout that Jessica had been willing to kill for. When? I managed to ask. When did they take out this policy? Detective Chen consulted her notes. 7 months ago, in March, David increased his coverage from $50,000 to $500,000. According to the insurance company, Jessica contacted them directly, saying they needed more coverage because David was the primary breadwinner and she wanted to ensure financial security if anything happened to him. My hands clenched into fists. She planned this. She planned this for months. It appears so, Detective Chen confirmed grimly. The timing suggests premeditation. She secured the increased life insurance policy, then waited a few months before beginning the insulin injections. If David had died from hypoglycemic shock, especially after repeated hospitalizations that established a pattern of mysterious medical episodes, it would have looked like a tragic, unexplained medical condition. Natural causes. The insurance company would have had no reason to deny the claim. A doctor I hadn't met before entered the room, his face grave. Mrs. Moore, I'm Dr. Patel, the chief toxicologist. We've completed the initial blood work on your son. The levels of insulin in his system are consistent with multiple large doses administered over several hours. If you hadn't arrived when you did and stopped that final injection, he likely would have slipped into an irreversible coma within the next 30 minutes. 30 minutes. I'd been 30 minutes away from losing my son forever. Will he be okay? I asked, my voice barely audible. It's too early to say definitively, Dr. Patel said carefully. The next 48 hours are critical. We're administering glucose continuously and monitoring him closely. But Mrs. Moore, I need you to understand, the repeated insulin poisoning over the past 6 weeks has put tremendous stress on his body. We don't yet know if there's been damage to his brain, his organs, his nervous system. Even if he survives, he may face a long recovery. Each word was a knife to my heart. My vibrant, strong, hard-working son had been reduced to this, fighting for his life in an ICU because the woman who'd promised to love him had spent months trying to murder him. Can I see him? I asked. Soon, Dr. Patel promised. They're getting him settled in the ICU now. I'll have someone come get you as soon as you can visit. After the doctor left, Detective Chen continued her questions. Mrs. Moore, I need to understand the dynamics of David and Jessica's marriage. Did you notice any signs of problems between them? I thought carefully, sifting through 8 years of memories. They seemed happy, I said slowly. David adored her. He'd talk about how lucky he was, how perfect she was. He'd work himself to exhaustion to give her what she wanted, that coach purse, a new car 2 years ago, expensive dinners, vacations to the Caribbean. They went to Cabo San Lucas last year, and that trip cost them $8,000 they'd saved for over a year. What about Jessica? How did she seem? I thought she loved him too, I admitted. She'd smile and laugh and act like the perfect wife. But now, looking back, there were small things. Comments she'd make about David being too attached to his family, how he should be more independent. She'd get this look sometimes when David would mention spending time with me, just a flash of annoyance before she'd smile again. Did she ever directly express hostility toward you? Not openly, I said. But there were passive-aggressive moments. Once, at Thanksgiving 2 years ago, she made a comment about how it was time for David to start new traditions with his nuclear family instead of always going back to his childhood home. David got upset and said I was his family too, and Jessica laughed it off like she'd been joking. But her eyes weren't laughing. Detective Chen wrote this all down. What about David's will? Do you know who would inherit his assets if he died? Everything would go to Jessica, I said. He told me that was standard for married couples. He has about $85,000 in a 401k from his job, and they own their house jointly. With the mortgage, there's about $120,000 in equity. I did the math quickly in my head. So Jessica would have gotten the $500,000 from life insurance, plus the retirement account, plus the house equity. Over $700,000. More than enough motive for murder, Detective Chen said darkly. Especially when you consider that divorce would have meant splitting assets. This way she'd get everything, plus the sympathy of being a grieving widow. A grieving widow who'd murdered her husband for money. The calculation of it, the cold-blooded planning, made me physically ill. I lurched toward the trash can in the corner and vomited, my body rejecting the horror of what I'd learned. When I'd recovered, wiping my mouth with shaking hands, Detective Chen passed me a bottle of water. I know this is incredibly difficult, Mrs. Moore, but your testimony and the evidence we're gathering are crucial. Jessica's confession in front of multiple witnesses, the stolen insulin, the security footage, the life insurance policy, it's building into a strong case. What will happen to her? I asked. Given the premeditation, the multiple attempts, and the fact that she's a medical professional who abused her position and knowledge, she's looking at attempted murder in the first degree. In Ohio, that carries a potential sentence of 15 years to life in prison. 15 years to life. It seemed both too much and too little. No amount of prison time could restore the weeks of torture David had endured, the unnecessary surgery, the money lost, the trust betrayed. There's one more thing, Detective Chen said hesitantly. We found text messages on Jessica's phone, messages between her and someone named Marcus Reeves. Do you know that name? I shook my head. He's a personal trainer at the gym where Jessica works out. According to the messages, they've been having an affair for the past 8 months. The conversations suggest that they'd discussed starting a new life together once Jessica was free. Detective Chen paused. Mrs. Moore, your daughter-in-law wasn't just trying to murder your son for money. She was trying to murder him so she could be with her lover. The ICU waiting room became my home for the next 3 days. I sat in an uncomfortable plastic chair, surrounded by other families experiencing their own medical nightmares, and waited for news about David. The hospital had kindly arranged for a cot in the corner, and nurses brought me coffee and sandwiches that I couldn't bring myself to eat. Every few hours, they'd allow me into David's room for 15-minute visits, and each time, I'd sit beside his unconscious form, holding his hand and whispering prayers into the sterile air. My younger daughter, Rebecca, flew in from Seattle within 24 hours of hearing the news. She'd always been the strong one, the practical one, but even she broke down when she saw her brother lying in that hospital bed. Tubes and wires connecting him to machines that beeped steadily, monitoring every fragile heartbeat. How could she do this? Rebecca sobbed against my shoulder during our second day in the waiting room. Jessica came to my wedding. She smiled in all the photos. She sent me birthday cards. How could someone who seemed so normal do something so evil? I don't know, sweetheart, I murmured, stroking her hair like I'd done when she was small. I've asked myself the same question 1,000 times. Rebecca pulled back, wiping her eyes. Have you talked to the lawyers yet? I had. 2 of them, actually. The first was a criminal attorney whom Detective Chen had recommended, a sharp woman named Maria Rodriguez, who'd immediately taken an interest in the case. She'd explained that while the state would prosecute Jessica criminally, we could also pursue a civil case for the medical bills, pain and suffering, and emotional distress. The $38,000 for the unnecessary surgery, I told Rebecca, plus all the emergency room visits, the ambulances, the medications. We're looking at close to $75,000 in medical bills so far, not counting whatever this ICU stay will cost. And that's with insurance. Jessica's responsible for all of it. Will she have to pay? Rebecca asked. She will, Maria had assured me during our phone consultation. We'll go after every asset she has. Her salary, her retirement accounts, everything. She won't profit from this crime, I promise you that. The second lawyer was an estate attorney I'd hired to ensure David's will was immediately amended. The moment he woke up, when he woke up, I corrected myself fiercely, we'd change everything so Jessica couldn't inherit a single penny. The lawyer was already preparing the paperwork, ready to execute the changes the second David was conscious and capable of signing. On the morning of the 3rd day, Dr. Patel came to find me in the waiting room. My heart leaped into my throat at the sight of his face. He's awake, Dr. Patel said, and I collapsed with relief. He's confused and weak, but he's conscious and responsive. He's asking for you. Rebecca and I practically ran to his room. David was propped up slightly in the bed, his face pale and drawn, dark circles under his eyes, but those eyes were open and aware. When he saw me, his face crumpled. "Mom," he croaked, his voice rough from the breathing tube they'd removed that morning. "I'm here, baby," I said, rushing to his side and taking his hand. It was warm now, no longer the cold, clammy appendage I'd held for 3 days. "I'm right here, Jessica," he started, and I saw confusion and betrayal warring in his expression. The nurses said, she tried to—" He couldn't finish the sentence. "I know," I said softly, squeezing his hand. "I know everything, but you're safe now. She can't hurt you anymore." Tears streamed down his face. 8 years, he whispered. "I gave her 8 years of my life. I worked myself into the ground for her. I loved her so much. How could she?" "I don't have an answer for that," I admitted. "But David, you need to focus on getting better now. We'll deal with everything else later. Right now, you just need to heal." Rebecca stood on the other side of his bed, holding his other hand. "We're here, big brother. We've got you. We're not going anywhere." Over the next several hours, with permission from the doctors and Detective Chen present, we gently told David everything. About the insulin injections, the stolen medication, the life insurance policy, the affair with Marcus Reeves, the $700,000 Jessica would have collected if her plan had succeeded. With each revelation, I watched pieces of my son's heart break all over again. "She was going to kill me," he said numbly. "My wife was going to murder me for money and another man." "Yes," Detective Chen confirmed gently. "We have overwhelming evidence, David. Security footage, the stolen insulin, her confession in front of multiple witnesses, text messages between her and her accomplice. She's been charged with attempted murder in the 1st degree, multiple counts of assault with a deadly weapon, theft of controlled substances, and insurance fraud. Her bail was set at $2 million. "Will she make bail?" David asked fearfully. "No," Detective Chen assured him. "Jessica's parents refused to help her, and she has no one else willing or able to post that kind of bond. She'll remain in custody until trial." That news seemed to ease some of David's tension. He sagged back against the pillows, exhausted from the conversation and the emotional trauma. "What happens now?" he asked quietly. "Now you recover," I said firmly. "Now you get strong again. And now we make sure Jessica pays for every single thing she's done to you." Dr. Patel, who'd been present for the conversation, spoke up. "David, I need to be honest with you about your prognosis. The repeated insulin poisoning has caused significant stress to your body. You're going to need physical therapy, possibly counseling for the trauma, and ongoing monitoring of your blood sugar levels. Your body's own insulin regulation may have been disrupted by the artificial manipulation. We won't know the full extent of the damage for several weeks. More consequences of Jessica's actions, more pain, more suffering, more expenses. My mind was already tallying the costs: physical therapy, counseling sessions, medications, follow-up appointments. How much more would Jessica's betrayal ultimately cost us, not just financially, but emotionally? A nurse knocked and entered with a rolling tray. "Mr. Moore, I have your lunch. Clear broth and juice for now, just to make sure your system can handle food again." As David slowly sipped the broth, I noticed his hands trembling. Whether from weakness or emotion, I couldn't tell. Probably both. "Mom," he said after a few sips, "I need to ask you something." "Anything, sweetheart." "That morning, when you came to the hospital, why were you so early? You weren't supposed to arrive until 10 o'clock. I thought back to that inexplicable anxiety that had woken me, the urgent need to get to his side. "I don't know," I admitted. "I just knew I had to come. Something was telling me you needed me right then." David's eyes filled with tears again. "You saved my life. If you'd come at 10 like planned, I'd be dead right now." "Don't think about that," I said, though the same thought had haunted me for 3 days. "You're alive. That's all that matters." But even as I said it, I knew the nightmare was far from over. Jessica's trial would bring everything into the public eye. David would have to testify, relive the trauma, face his would-be murderer across a courtroom. And before that, there would be depositions, legal proceedings, motions, and appeals. The road ahead would be long and painful. Still, as I sat there watching my son eat his first real meal in days, I felt a fierce determination growing inside me. Jessica had tried to destroy my family. Now, I would make absolutely certain she faced the full consequences of her actions. Over the following week, as David slowly regained his strength in the hospital, Detective Chen continued to uncover the full extent of Jessica's crimes. What had initially seemed like a straightforward case of attempted murder grew darker and more complex with each passing day. Mrs. Moore, Detective Chen said during one of our daily meetings in the hospital's conference room. We finished analyzing Jessica's phone and computer. What we found is disturbing. I braced myself. How could this possibly get worse? Jessica had been researching methods of undetectable poisoning for over 9 months, the detective explained, spreading printed screenshots across the table. Her search history shows queries like insulin poisoning symptoms, how to cause hypoglycemia, untraceable ways to kill someone, and how long does insulin stay in the system. She also researched life insurance fraud cases and how investigators detect foul play. Each search term felt like a nail in Jessica's coffin, but also a knife in my heart. 9 months of planning. This hadn't been a sudden impulse or a moment of madness. This had been cold, calculated, methodical preparation for murder. There's more, Detective Chen continued. We've also recovered deleted text messages between Jessica and Marcus Reeves, her lover. The messages go back 8 months and explicitly discuss their plans for starting over once Jessica was free. In one particularly damning exchange from 6 months ago, Marcus asked Jessica how long it would take, and she responded, "Not long now. I've got everything in place." Rebecca, who was sitting beside me, gasped. They both knew. Her boyfriend knew she was planning to kill David. Yes, Detective Chen confirmed. Marcus Reeves has been arrested as well and charged as an accomplice to attempted murder. He claims he thought Jessica was joking about getting rid of her husband, but the text messages tell a different story. At one point, he sent her articles about insulin poisoning and how it's difficult to detect. So they researched it together, I said, feeling sick. They planned my son's murder together. The prosecution believes so. Marcus Reeves is cooperating with investigators now, trying to reduce his own sentence, and his testimony will be crucial at Jessica's trial. He's admitted that Jessica told him about the increased life insurance policy and said they'd use the money to start a new life together in Costa Rica. She'd even researched property prices there. Costa Rica. They'd planned to escape to another country with blood money, leaving David dead and me to grieve, never knowing the truth. The premeditation was staggering. What about Jessica's parents? Rebecca asked. Have they been contacted? Yes, Detective Chen said. They're devastated. Apparently, Jessica's father is a retired police officer, which makes this particularly difficult for him. They've completely disowned her and have offered their full cooperation with the investigation. Her mother provided us with some interesting background information. What kind of background? I asked. Detective Chen pulled out another file. According to Jessica's mother, this isn't the first time Jessica has exhibited concerning behavior. When she was in high school, a boyfriend broke up with her, and shortly afterward, he was hospitalized with mysterious symptoms, severe nausea, vomiting, and dehydration. No one ever proved anything, but Jessica's mother suspected her daughter had put something in the boy's drink at a party. Then, in nursing school, there was an incident with a roommate who'd been dating a guy Jessica was interested in. The roommate experienced a severe allergic reaction to something in her food, even though she'd never had allergies before. Did anyone investigate these incidents? Rebecca demanded. No formal investigations were ever conducted. Both were dismissed as unfortunate accidents or coincidences. But Jessica's mother now believes there was a pattern of behavior, a pattern of harming people who stood in the way of what Jessica wanted. A pattern. The word chilled me. My son hadn't been Jessica's first victim. He'd just been the most calculated, the most valuable target. I've done something terrible, I said suddenly, the realization hitting me. I encouraged David to marry her. When they were dating, I thought she was perfect for him. I told him she was a keeper, that he'd be lucky to have her. I pushed him toward this marriage. Mom, no, Rebecca said firmly, gripping my hand. You couldn't have known. Jessica fooled everyone. She had references from hospitals. She passed background checks to work in healthcare. She presented as a normal, loving person. This isn't your fault. But the guilt gnawed at me anyway. What if I'd been more observant? What if I'd noticed the red flags in Jessica's behavior earlier? Detective Chen interrupted my spiral of self-recrimination. Mrs. Moore, I need to discuss finances with you. We've examined Jessica and David's joint bank accounts, and there are some concerning discrepancies. What kind of discrepancies? Over the past year, Jessica has withdrawn approximately $67,000 in cash from their joint savings account. When we asked her about these withdrawals, she claimed the money was for household expenses, but the amounts and frequency suggest otherwise. We believe she was stockpiling cash for her planned escape with Marcus Reeves. $67,000. David's hard-earned money, savings he'd accumulated through years of careful budgeting and overtime shifts, stolen by his wife to fund her new life with her lover. That money was supposed to be for a house, I said, my voice hollow. David told me they were saving for a down payment on a bigger house, maybe somewhere with a yard where they could raise children. He wanted to give Jessica everything she deserved. The irony was crushing. We're working to trace where that money went, Detective Chen assured me. If we can prove it was part of the murder plot, it may be recoverable as proceeds of criminal activity. Additionally, the insurance company has been notified and has already indicated they'll be denying any claims related to David's life insurance policy. They're considering their own fraud charges against Jessica. Over the next few days, more evidence emerged. Security footage from David and Jessica's neighborhood showed Marcus Reeves visiting their house multiple times while David was at work, sometimes staying for hours. Neighbors, when interviewed, reported seeing Jessica and Marcus kissing in her car several months ago, but had assumed it was innocent, perhaps a relative. Financial records showed that Jessica had purchased 2 plane tickets to Costa Rica for December 15th, just 3 weeks away, using a credit card David didn't know about. The puzzle pieces were assembling into a horrifying picture. Jessica had planned to kill David just before Thanksgiving, wait a brief period of grieving, collect the insurance money, and liquidate assets, then flee the country with her lover before Christmas. It was a timeline that accounted for every detail, every potential complication. She almost got away with it, David said when Detective Chen shared these findings with him. He was out of the ICU now, recovering in a regular room, growing stronger each day. If Mom hadn't come early that morning, if she hadn't seen what Jessica was doing, I'd be dead right now and Jessica would be on a beach in Costa Rica by Christmas, drinking cocktails bought with my life insurance money. But she didn't get away with it, I said firmly. You're alive, and she's going to prison for the rest of her life. I just can't believe I married someone capable of this, David said, staring at his hands. I loved her, Mom. I really loved her. I would have done anything for her. How did I not see who she really was? Because she's a psychopath, Detective Chen said bluntly. That's not a medical diagnosis, but it's an accurate description. People like Jessica are skilled at manipulation, at presenting themselves as trustworthy and loving while hiding their true nature. You're not the first person to be fooled by someone like her, and you won't be the last. But the important thing is that you survived, and now she'll face justice. Justice. It seemed like such a small word for what Jessica deserved. News of Jessica's arrest and the details of her crimes spread through Columbus like wildfire. Within a week, it was the top story on every local news channel and had even made national headlines. Nurse accused of attempting to murder husband with stolen insulin, and life insurance murder plot foiled by mother's intuition. The hospital where Jessica had worked issued a statement expressing shock and horror, announcing a full investigation into their security protocols and medication storage procedures. How had a nurse been able to steal 40 vials of insulin without being detected? What safeguards had failed? The hospital faced potential lawsuits and serious questions about patient safety. David's employer, a construction company where he'd worked for 12 years, set up a GoFundMe campaign to help with his medical expenses. I'd been hesitant about accepting charity, but Rebecca convinced me that people genuinely wanted to help. The campaign exceeded its goal of $50,000 within 3 days, ultimately raising over $85,000 from hundreds of donors, co-workers, neighbors, friends, and even strangers who'd been moved by David's story. "Look at this, Mom," Rebecca said, scrolling through the donations on her phone. "People from all over the country are contributing. Here's someone from California who donated $500, and this person from Maine wrote, 'My brother went through something similar. Stay strong, David. Justice will prevail.'" The outpouring of support was overwhelming. Cards and flowers flooded David's hospital room. The staff had to set up a second table just to hold them all. People David had worked with for years came to visit, some breaking down in tears at his bedside, expressing guilt that they hadn't noticed something was wrong. "I should have known," said Tom, David's foreman, and a man I'd met at several company events. "You'd come to work looking exhausted, pale, sometimes barely able to stand. I thought you were just pushing yourself too hard, working too many hours. I never imagined someone was poisoning you." "No one could have known," David reassured him. Jessica was careful. She knew exactly how much to give me to make me sick without making it obvious what was happening. But perhaps the most surprising response came from Jessica's own family. Her father, retired police officer Gerald Miller, requested a meeting with me during David's second week in the hospital. I was hesitant, unsure what to expect, but Detective Chen assured me it would be safe and potentially helpful. Gerald Miller was a large man with iron-gray hair and eyes that had seen too much pain. He sat across from me in the hospital cafeteria, his hands clasped tightly on the table between us, and spoke in a voice rough with emotion. "Mrs. Moore, I don't expect forgiveness, and I'm not here to make excuses for my daughter. What Jessica did is unforgivable. But I need you to know, I need David to know, that her mother and I are horrified by her actions. We didn't raise her to be a monster." "What did you raise her to be?" I asked, perhaps more harshly than intended. Gerald flinched, but didn't look away. "We raised her to be kind, to help people, to do the right thing. Her mother is a nurse too. That's why Jessica went into nursing. We thought she wanted to help people, to make a difference. We were wrong." "You mentioned to Detective Chen that there were incidents when Jessica was younger," I said. "Why didn't you do something then?" His face crumpled. "I failed. God help me. I failed. I convinced myself that my daughter couldn't possibly be capable of deliberate harm. I explained away the warning signs, called them coincidences, told myself every teenage girl goes through difficult periods. By the time I started to see the pattern, she was an adult, out of our house, and I thought maybe she'd matured, changed. Then she married David, and she seemed happy, stable. I wanted to believe she'd become a better person. But she hadn't," I said flatly. "No," Gerald agreed, his voice breaking. "She'd just gotten better at hiding what she was. Mrs. Moore, I spent 32 years as a police officer. I interviewed murderers, investigated crimes, saw the worst of humanity, and I couldn't see the danger in my own daughter. That's something I'll have to live with for the rest of my life." We sat in silence for a moment. I wanted to be angry at this man, to blame him for not stopping Jessica sooner, but I saw the genuine anguish in his face. He was suffering too, grieving the daughter he'd thought he had while grappling with the monster she'd become. "Jessica's mother and I have set up a trust," Gerald continued. "We're putting in $100,000, most of our retirement savings. We want it to go toward David's medical expenses and recovery. It's not enough, not nearly enough, but it's all we can do." I was stunned. "You don't have to do that. This isn't your fault." "Yes, it is," Gerald said firmly. "I should have seen the signs. I should have gotten her help when she was young. Maybe if I had, your son wouldn't be in a hospital bed right now. Please, Mrs. Moore, let us do this one thing to try to make amends for the daughter we raised." I agreed to accept the money, not for myself, but for David. He'd need it for the long recovery ahead, for the therapy and treatments he'd require. Jessica's parents had nothing to do with her crimes, but they were trying to help, and I couldn't refuse that. The meeting was reported in the local news, and public opinion about the case became even more sympathetic toward David. Here was a young man who'd almost been murdered by his wife, and even her own parents were supporting him rather than their daughter. Jessica's isolation was complete. Meanwhile, the legal proceedings were moving forward. Maria Rodriguez, our civil attorney, filed a lawsuit against Jessica for medical expenses, pain and suffering, emotional distress, and punitive damages. The total claim was for $1.8 million, a number that seemed almost abstract, but Maria assured me was justified given the severity and premeditation of Jessica's crimes. "We'll never collect the full amount," Maria explained during one of our strategy sessions. "Jessica doesn't have anywhere near that much money, but we'll get judgments against her, liens on any future assets, garnishments of any wages she might earn after she's released from prison decades from now. The goal is to ensure she never profits from this, never builds a comfortable life while David is still recovering from what she did to him." The criminal trial was scheduled for March, giving prosecutors time to build an ironclad case. Jessica had been offered a plea deal, 25 years with the possibility of parole in exchange for a guilty plea. But she'd refused. Her public defender told the press that Jessica maintained she'd been trying to help her husband, not harm him, and that the prosecution's case was based on misunderstandings and circumstantial evidence. "She's delusional," David said when he heard about Jessica's continued denials. "I saw the evidence. Everyone saw the evidence. There's security footage, text messages, her confession. What more does she need?" "Some people can never admit what they've done," Detective Chen explained. "Jessica may genuinely believe her own lies at this point, or she's hoping that by maintaining her innocence, she might manipulate a jury into doubt. Either way, the evidence against her is overwhelming. She will be convicted." As David prepared to be discharged from the hospital after 3 weeks of recovery, I reflected on how much our lives had changed in such a short time. David would be moving in with me temporarily, unable to live alone while he regained his strength and underwent physical therapy. His house, the one he'd shared with Jessica, was now a crime scene, marked by police tape and filled with memories that would forever be tainted. "I never want to go back there," David told me as nurses prepared his discharge papers. "Every room reminds me of her, of the life I thought we had. I want to sell it as soon as possible." "We will," I promised. "We'll handle it together." Rebecca had extended her stay in Columbus, taking leave from her job in Seattle to help care for David. The three of us had always been close, but this nightmare had bound us even tighter. We were a team, united against the evil that had invaded our family. As I wheeled David out of the hospital on his discharge day, past nurses who'd cared for him and saved his life, I felt an overwhelming mix of emotions. Gratitude that he was alive, rage at what Jessica had done, determination to see justice served, and beneath it all, a fierce protective love for my children that would never, could never be broken. March arrived with unseasonable cold, and with it came the trial of Jessica Moore. The courthouse in downtown Columbus became the center of media attention, with news vans lining the streets and reporters shoving microphones at anyone connected to the case. David, Rebecca, and I arrived each morning through a side entrance, trying to avoid the worst of the circus atmosphere. The prosecution's case was led by Assistant District Attorney Michael Thompson, a veteran prosecutor known for his methodical approach and devastating cross-examinations. During his opening statement, he painted a picture of Jessica that was chilling in its calculated cruelty. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," Thompson began, pacing slowly in front of the jury box. "This is a case about premeditated murder, about a woman who spent 9 months planning to kill her husband for money so she could run away with her lover. Jessica Moore is a registered nurse, a person trusted with the care of vulnerable patients. She used that medical knowledge, that trusted position, to steal insulin from her hospital and systematically poison her husband, bringing him to the brink of death multiple times over 6 weeks. Thompson laid out the evidence piece by piece: the stolen insulin, the security footage, the life insurance policy, the text messages with Marcus Reeves, the search history, the plane tickets to Costa Rica. Each piece of evidence was damning on its own. Together, they formed an unassailable narrative of guilt. The first witness was Dr. Patel, the toxicologist, who explained in clear, accessible terms how insulin poisoning works and what it had done to David's body. He showed the jury David's blood test results from the day I'd caught Jessica in the act, pointing out the dangerously high insulin levels that could only have come from external administration. In a non-diabetic patient, Dr. Patel testified, "These insulin levels are not just unusual, they're impossible to occur naturally. Someone deliberately injected Mr. Moore with massive doses of insulin, enough to cause severe hypoglycemia, coma, and potentially death." Detective Chen testified next, walking the jury through the investigation from my 911 call to the discovery of the stolen insulin in Jessica's bag, to the text messages that revealed the affair and the murder plot. She remained calm and professional throughout, even when Jessica's defense attorney tried to suggest the evidence had been misinterpreted. "Detective," the defense attorney said during cross-examination, "isn't it possible that Mrs. Moore was simply trying to help her husband? She's a trained nurse. Perhaps she believed he needed additional insulin for some medical reason." "No," Detective Chen replied firmly. "David Moore is not diabetic. He has never been prescribed insulin. There is no legitimate medical reason to give insulin to a non-diabetic patient, and as a nurse, Jessica Moore knew that. Furthermore, the text messages between Mrs. Moore and Marcus Reeves explicitly discussed their plan to start over once David was dead. That's not helping someone. That's murder. The hospital administrator testified about the missing insulin from the pharmacy and the security footage showing Jessica accessing restricted areas during her off hours. Jessica's former supervisor, a woman who'd worked with her for 5 years, broke down crying on the stand as she described feeling betrayed by someone she'd trusted. Jessica was a good nurse, the supervisor said through tears. Patients liked her. Staff liked her. I never would have suspected she was capable of this. The fact that she used her medical knowledge, her access to the hospital, to harm her own husband, it betrays everything our profession stands for. But the most powerful testimony came on the 3rd day of the trial, when David took the stand. He'd lost weight during his ordeal and recovery, his face thinner, lines of stress and trauma etched around his eyes. I watched him raise his right hand and swear to tell the truth, and my heart broke all over again for what my son had endured. The prosecutor led David through his story gently, but thoroughly. David described his marriage to Jessica, the love he'd felt for her, the sacrifices he'd made to provide for their future. Then he described the beginning of his mysterious symptoms, the weakness, the confusion, the repeated hospitalizations. I thought I was dying, David said, his voice steady but filled with pain. The doctors couldn't figure out what was wrong with me. They ran every test imaginable. I was terrified. And through it all, Jessica was there. She held my hand, brought me to the hospital, took care of me. I trusted her completely. When did you learn the truth about what was happening to you? Thompson asked. When the police told me, after they arrested Jessica. Detective Chen came to my ICU room and explained that my wife had been poisoning me with insulin for 6 weeks, that she'd been planning to kill me. David's voice broke. I didn't want to believe it. How could the person I loved most in the world be trying to murder me? The defense attorney tried to attack David's credibility during cross-examination, suggesting he'd been a controlling husband, that the marriage had problems David wasn't acknowledging. But David remained calm and truthful. Our marriage wasn't perfect, David admitted. No marriage is, but I loved Jessica. I worked extra shifts to give her the life she wanted. I never raised my voice to her, never laid a hand on her. I was completely faithful to her. If she was unhappy, she could have asked for a divorce. I would have been heartbroken, but I would have let her go. She didn't have to kill me. The courtroom was silent, except for the sound of muffled crying from several jurors. On the 4th day, the prosecution played the recording of Jessica's initial confession at the hospital, her voice clear as she admitted to keeping David weak and dependent. They presented financial records showing the $67,000 she'd withdrawn and the plane tickets to Costa Rica. They called Marcus Reeves to the stand. Marcus Reeves was a handsome man in his early 30s, gym-muscled and well-groomed, but he looked terrified as he took the stand. He'd already pleaded guilty to conspiracy to commit murder in exchange for testifying against Jessica, and his testimony was devastating. Jessica told me she was going to make David sick enough that it would look like natural causes, Marcus testified, not meeting Jessica's eyes even though she stared at him from the defense table. She said once he died, we'd split the insurance money and move to Costa Rica. She made it sound like a perfect plan. Did you try to stop her? Thompson asked. Marcus's face crumpled with shame. No. I didn't think she'd actually go through with it. I thought she was just venting, fantasizing. By the time I realized she was serious, she'd already started. I should have called the police, should have warned David. Instead, I went along with it because I wanted to be with her. The defense called few witnesses, and Jessica didn't take the stand in her own defense, a decision that seemed to doom her case. Her attorney tried to argue that the evidence was circumstantial, that Jessica had been having a breakdown and wasn't in her right mind, but the jury wasn't buying it. The premeditation was too clear, the evidence too overwhelming. During closing arguments, Thompson stood before the jury and spoke with quiet intensity. Jessica Moore is a murderer who failed only because her mother-in-law arrived early for a hospital visit. If Evelyn Moore had come at 10 o'clock as planned instead of 7:30, David Moore would be dead. This wasn't a crime of passion or a moment of madness. This was 9 months of planning, 6 weeks of torture, and a willingness to let an innocent man die for money. Jessica Moore deserves to spend the rest of her life in prison. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. When they returned, The forewoman read the verdict in a strong, clear voice. Guilty on all counts. Jessica's face remained blank, but I saw her hands trembling as the bailiff placed handcuffs on her wrists. As they led her from the courtroom, she finally looked at David. For a moment, I thought I saw a flash of something, remorse maybe, or recognition of the magnitude of what she'd done. But then it was gone, replaced by cold emptiness. Outside the courthouse, surrounded by reporters and cameras, David made a brief statement. Justice has been served today. Jessica Moore will spend many years in prison for what she did to me, and I hope other victims of domestic violence and abuse will find the courage to come forward. No one deserves to be poisoned, manipulated, or tortured by someone who claims to love them. The sentencing was scheduled for 2 weeks later. The sentencing hearing took place on a warm spring morning in late March. The courtroom was packed with observers, media representatives, and people who'd followed the case and wanted to see its conclusion. Jessica was brought in wearing an orange jumpsuit, her hair pulled back severely, her face drawn and aged by weeks in jail awaiting sentencing. Judge Margaret Sullivan, a no-nonsense woman in her 60s with a reputation for tough sentences, presided over the hearing. She'd reviewed all the evidence, all the testimony, and the extensive pre-sentence report prepared by probation officers. "Mrs. Moore," Judge Sullivan said, looking directly at Jessica, "you have been convicted by a jury of your peers of attempted murder in the first degree, multiple counts of assault with a deadly weapon, theft of controlled substances, and insurance fraud. Before I impose sentence, I'm going to allow the victims to speak. Mr. Moore, would you like to address the court?" David stood slowly, holding the statement he'd spent weeks preparing. His voice was steady, but I could hear the emotion underneath. "Your Honor, Jessica Moore took everything from me. She took my health, forcing me through weeks of torment and an unnecessary surgery that cost me $38,000 and an organ I can never get back. She took my sense of security, making me question whether I'll ever be able to trust anyone again. She took the future I'd planned, the family I'd hoped to build. Most of all, she took my ability to believe in love. How do you recover from learning that the person you loved most in the world spent months trying to murder you?" David paused, wiping his eyes. "I'm 37 years old, and I should be in the prime of my life. Instead, I'm in physical therapy, relearning how to do things my poisoned body forgot how to do. I'm in counseling trying to process the trauma of being slowly murdered by my wife. I have nightmares where I'm back in that hospital bed, helpless, while Jessica injects poison into my veins. Those nightmares might never go away. But I'm alive," David continued, his voice growing stronger. "I'm alive because my mother's love and intuition saved me. I'm alive because good people like Detective Chen and Dr. Patel fought to save me. I'm alive, and I'm going to rebuild my life. Jessica failed to kill me, and I won't let her destroy me. Your Honor, I ask that you impose the maximum sentence possible so that Jessica Moore never has the opportunity to harm anyone else the way she harmed me." There wasn't a dry eye in the courtroom. Several jurors from the trial who'd returned to see the sentencing were openly crying. I spoke next, approaching the podium with Rebecca's hand squeezing mine for support. "Your Honor, I'm Evelyn Moore, David's mother. If I'd arrived at that hospital 15 minutes later, I'd be standing here at my son's funeral instead of at his attempted murderer's sentencing. Jessica Moore didn't just try to kill David. She tried to rob me of my child, to rob Rebecca of her brother, to rob the world of a good, kind, hard-working man who never hurt anyone. The financial cost alone has been devastating," I continued. "Between the emergency room visits, the surgeries, the hospital stays, the therapy, and the ongoing medical care, we've incurred over $150,000 in expenses. David lost his job because he was too sick to work, sick because Jessica was poisoning him. We've lost wages, savings, years of financial security, but the emotional cost is incalculable. How do you put a price on the trust that was destroyed, the innocence that was lost, the trauma that will affect my son for the rest of his life?" Finally, Jessica was given the opportunity to speak. She stood, her lawyer beside her, and addressed the court in a voice that was almost unrecognizable from the cheerful, sweet-voiced daughter-in-law I'd once known. "I'm sorry," Jessica said flatly, the words hollow. "I made mistakes, and I'm sorry for the pain I caused." Judge Sullivan's expression hardened. "Mrs. Moore, your apology rings rather hollow, given that you've shown no remorse throughout this entire process. You maintained your innocence despite overwhelming evidence. You blamed your husband, suggested he was controlling and abusive, attempted to paint yourself as the victim. Only now, when facing the consequences of your actions, do you claim to be sorry. I don't believe you're sorry for what you did. I believe you're sorry you were caught. The judge took a deep breath and continued. I've presided over hundreds of criminal cases in my career, but this one stands out for its calculated cruelty. You're a trained nurse who took an oath to do no harm, yet you used your medical knowledge to torture your husband for 6 weeks. You systematically stole from your hospital, betrayed your profession, betrayed your marriage vows, and came within 30 minutes of committing murder. The premeditation here is extraordinary. 9 months of planning, researching, preparing. This wasn't a crime of passion. This was cold-blooded attempted murder for financial gain. Judge Sullivan opened a folder and began reading. On the charge of attempted murder in the first degree, I sentence you to 25 years in prison. On the charges of assault with a deadly weapon, 8 counts, I sentence you to 10 years on each count to run consecutively for a total of 80 years. On the charge of theft of controlled substances, I sentence you to 5 years. On the charge of insurance fraud, I sentence you to 3 years. All sentences to run consecutively for a total of 113 years in prison. You will be eligible for parole consideration after serving 85% of your sentence, which means you will be 131 years old before you can seek release. Gasps echoed through the courtroom. 113 years. Jessica would die in prison, would never walk free again, would never profit from her crimes or harm another innocent person. Jessica's face crumpled, and for the first time, I saw genuine emotion. Not remorse for what she'd done, but horror at the consequences she would face. As the bailiffs led her away, she was sobbing, crying out that it wasn't fair, that she didn't deserve this, but she did deserve it. Every single year of that sentence was earned through her deliberate, sustained attempt to murder my son. Outside the courthouse, we held a final press conference. David, stronger now after months of physical therapy and counseling, spoke with confidence. Today, justice was served. Jessica Moore will spend the rest of her life in prison, and I can finally begin to truly heal. I want to thank everyone who supported me through this nightmare. My mother, my sister, the medical professionals who saved my life, the police who investigated my case, and the prosecutors who fought for justice. I also want to thank the thousands of people who donated to my GoFundMe campaign, sent cards and messages, and reminded me that there's still goodness in the world. Most importantly, David continued, I want to encourage anyone who's in an abusive relationship to seek help. Abuse isn't always physical. Sometimes it's emotional, financial, or in my case, medical. If someone in your life is harming you, making you sick, manipulating you, please reach out to someone you trust. Tell a family member, call the police, contact a domestic violence hotline. You deserve to be safe, and you deserve to be loved by people who actually love you, not by people who see you as an obstacle to be eliminated. The donations from David's GoFundMe campaign, combined with the $100,000 from Jessica's parents and the settlement from the hospital for their security failures, meant that all of David's medical expenses were covered with money left over to help him start rebuilding his life. He'd filed for divorce the day after Jessica's arrest, and it had been finalized during the trial. He was free. Free from Jessica, free from the fear, free to start over. 3 months after the sentencing, David moved into a new apartment, a fresh start in a different neighborhood with no memories of Jessica. Rebecca flew in from Seattle to help him unpack and set up his new place. I brought homemade meals and helped him organize his kitchen. This is good, David said, looking around his bright, clean apartment. This feels like hope, and it was hope. Hope for healing, for recovery, for a future where my son could trust again, love again, live without fear. The road ahead would still be difficult. Therapy would continue, the financial recovery would take years, and the emotional scars would never completely fade. But we were together, we were strong, and we had survived. As I drove home that evening, watching the sunset paint the Columbus sky in shades of orange and pink, I felt overwhelming gratitude. Gratitude for the intuition that had sent me to that hospital early. Gratitude for the justice system that had held Jessica accountable. Gratitude for the love of my children and the strength of our family. Jessica Moore had tried to destroy us, but she had failed, and in her failure, she'd only made us stronger. To everyone who's followed this story, thank you for being with me through this journey. If this story moved you, please like this video, subscribe to our channel for more real-life stories of survival and justice, and leave a comment telling me where you're watching from and what time it is there. Knowing that people around the world are listening, caring, and supporting survivors gives me hope for humanity. Remember, trust your instincts, protect those you love, and never underestimate a mother's intuition. It might just save a life.